Welcome to Club Day. SITV니 데이비드
David Lee Roth a 6 da
Attenție,
manhã.
vă rugăm. David Roth este primul om de dimineață.
6 a.m. Mercazes.
It was right after my birthday, and I decided, I'm going to move to New York City. I don't really know anybody there. I have a lot of acquaintances through the music business, and, I have a fistful of cash, but no real relationships at home, and I don't have any real fix of where I'm going to move to or whatever, so I go set up shop at the Plaza Hotel in room, I think it's 420 or something like that. This is famous. This is where Tina Turner celebrated What's Love Got to Do with It when she won the Grammys for that in 1984, and, her big comeback, and, a lot of people would use that suite as the place where they would celebrate. A lot of good mojo in that before they redesigned the hotel, etc. So I set up shop there, and I started hanging around in New York City, and not very quickly, actually, within about 3-4 evenings, I ran into my girlfriend. And Karen and I started taking up with each other. She was very inner city. We were in love. And she says, she's coming from the fashion circle. She's coming from, I don't know what part of town that is, but very well-to-do and so forth. And she says, what do you like to do? Actually, she had this great South African accent. She says, so what do you like to do, Dave? Like that. And I told her, kayaking. I don't even know if she could spell it at that point in time. She says, so what do you mean? She has no real idea of it. We go kayaking around the island here in New York City. My good friend Eric Stiller, his father is the one who brought the Klepper kayaks to that part of the United States for the first time. The Klepper kayak is the kind of kayak that you can assemble out of two large backpacks, okay? If you carry one and I carry the other, then it contains, think of the way old airplane models were built. A frame that's made out of wood, okay? You slide it into a canvas and rubber skin and then pop it tight on the sides. You blow up what are attached inner tubes on the inside. You can carry up to 1,800 pounds inside of that. And this is what all of your special teams and special forces and your National Geographics and everybody are carrying into interior rivers and interior lakes and the fjords and this kind of a thing, because you can't, push a boat. You can't whatever. You'll have to pack it in. Or if you're, exploring something brand new, there are periods when you can't float no mo. You got to take the boat apart, carry it over the hill, and then reassemble it. In the middle of Manhattan in Union Square is a Klepper kayak shop. And when I first moved there, this was in the early 90s, I walked into the shop having been an avid kayaker, but I did not know what the Kleppers were, so forth. And I bumped into the family there, Eric and Mr. Stiller, and started taking lessons on the folding kayak in the world of this. The first time somebody crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a Klepper folding kayak, he was on the cover of Life magazine, and it was in the late 50s. Dr. Hans Landmann or some such like this. There have been a number of people who've gotten into these boats now and crossed the Pacific and the Atlantic in huge bodies of water. You could literally live out of the boat. We opted to merely live out of the boat while we circled the island of Manhattan. Manhattan, at its longest, is about 13 miles. At its widest, maybe 2 miles at its widest, okay? So we would set up the boats at the shop, which is right next to the park in Union Square. All right. Now, Uncle Manny related to me when I showed him pictures of us kayaking. He said, Union Square? Oh, my God. He said, I moved there. I had a little apartment there. Cost me $35 a month. This was, I think, whatever, the 50s or some such. Anyways, right next to the very famous coffee shop is the Klepper Kayak Store, and they're selling those. They had contests where they would have, they called it a bag-to-bag race, where from the South Street Seaport, where the ferries lift off of, okay, down by Wall Street, they would have the two bags of the boats, and they would blow the whistle, and on a time, okay, on a stopwatch, you would assemble the boat, put two people into it, paddle across the water to the Statue of Liberty, jump out, take the boat apart, put it back in the bags, and you would be timed for that, okay? The winners routinely were Mr. Stiller, who was in his 70s, and a 14-year-old. I think the first time she ran it was a 12-year-old, okay? And they set the boat up in 4.5 minutes. Got across the water, took it apart in even less, that kind of a thing, okay? They practiced for it, etc. Guys like me with a little High West whiskey and a little music in the background will take 15, 20 minutes to set up the boat, okay? But these were the boats that we were using and that are still being used when you're doing guerrilla kayaking. Karen still is a knockout. So cell phones just are starting to come in. It's the early 90s, etc. And she would stand around the corner. There's a big steep corner on the West Side Highway, right around 14th Street, where the sanitation department is. And the corner is big enough, sweeping enough, and long enough that if she stayed there, okay, on the cell phone, she could tell us when the cops were coming. Because what we did is we cut a hole in the fence at the sanitation department, pulled it apart, and that's where we snuck the boats through. We would have to take the boats from Union Square West and put wheels on the back of them, like a trolley, and lift the nose of the boat and drag these kayaks all the way from Union Square West all the way to the west side, okay? So that's got to be about a 45-minute drag. And along the way, you stop at all the liquor stores. You stop at the hardware store and get the, the flashlight batteries. You'll stop and get the bagels. You get the, whatever. Probably the most important would be the Gatorade. So you have a big bottle with a big opening for peeing in. And, you pick up all of your stuff as you go along the way. And as you would walk through the streets, people would look at it like you have an airplane that you're towing through the streets. And they would go, wow, are you going out there? Can you go out there? More importantly, can you return? Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. And, but I do recollect that there was a look of wonderment. People would look at it and think, oh, wow, a way to get off the island, a way to get into the other, to step through to the other side. As if the island, well, it is an island surrounded by a moat, it's surrounded by water. Ultimately, we would get to the Hudson River. This is the same place. It's just about where Sully landed the airplane when the geese ran into his engine and he landed the jet and everybody stood on the wings. It's just about the same exact place in the river. We cut a hole in the fence right next to the sanitation department. We picked that area because it was the dirtiest, it was the foulest smelling. Nobody would ever look in that area. And we would pull the fence apart like every prison movie that you ever saw and sneak kayaks the length of a Volkswagen through the hole, while my girlfriend / fashion model, etc., would stand a half a mile away around the corner to the north and tell us if somebody was coming. If somebody's coming, of course, then everybody would hide, behind the bushes, etc. There were a number of times that somebody would pull up, the local constabulary or whatever with flashlights, but by the time you're 6 feet away on the water, there's nothing they can do to stop you. Nobody's going in that water. That water at that time, that was Black Death. That was horrible. Today, they've done a damn good job of cleaning it up. And once you get out onto the water, it smells fresh. It's clean. You get a salt water. So it's tropical in the summertime. Cut to today, there are half a dozen kayak clubs, and they cater to groups. They cater to all special interest types. They cater to disadvantaged folks. I asked some of my buddies who are running some of the kayak clubs, I said, so what are some of the groups that you're running? Because we were doing it guerrilla style. There was nobody else out there. Every now and then one of us would get run over by the ferry boat. That was a big incident. One of the women that we knew got rolled underneath the entire barge, I think it was, came up the other side, and she was okay. We didn't have the internet to read the tide charts. We had to contact the Coast Guard and get printouts and try to, gauge when the tide would shift. We made it all the way around Manhattan in a February snowstorm. It took us 9.5 hours. And we were listening to the radio, and we had the headsets like motorcycles use, when you have the headgear and you can talk to each other and stuff. So there were probably 1, 2, 3, there were 4 boats, and the other boats all had their headgear on, and we were listening to some sport. I forget what it was, but you could hear them cheering off in the dark in the distance. You couldn't hear them, those last few hours of paddling in. My last experience of kayaking, we still do it routinely, was in Japan. And I was looking around. There are so many canals that lace the major cities of Japan, not city to city, but it's like an entire road map that comes from the 13, 14, 1500s. Before there were actual roads, they didn't even know what wheels were for a very long time, okay? And then when you started to build wheels, you had to make them out of wood, so it wasn't entirely it was not the most efficient way of travel. Everything was animals or walking. And the only people who rode horses or something like that was royalty, folks with the money, etc. So how do you get around? How do you move your sake jars around? How do you move the rice around? How do you, if you're selling shoes or whatever, how do you move that around the city? You use canals, and you use little barges, little 1- and 2-man barges. Think of the way Venice was kind of set up. These canals still exist all throughout Japan, all throughout, Tokyo, Osaka, Hokkaido, Kyoto. And these canals are built with, they were dredged out, and you have huge stones that look like something from the pyramids. And these stones, some of them go back to the 1100s, and the way the plants grow around them, etc. The trees have been there so long that they completely arc over some of the rivers and the canals like a tunnel. And when it gets to be the seasons and the cherry blossoms bloom, or the actual leaves start to fall, it's like snowing, and it matches the music that we're listening to in the background here. The water, because it's a canal, it's so still, it's like a swimming pool, and you can see to the bottom. Sometimes the bottom is 4 inches of draft underneath the boat, and sometimes it's 40 feet. And you'll feel like you're going along the top of a building, and all of a sudden, no more building. Like you're skiing off the top of a building, and you only get that experience in a helicopter sometimes. It's silent except for the sounds of traffic, because all around the canals, they've built the most modern superhighways with elevated rampings and curvilinear on-ramps and off-chutes, etc. From that perspective, underneath, looking up at the belly of those highways that have been elevated and stretched and so forth, while you're driving down the middle of 1602, is like out of science fiction. It's sort of post-apocalyptic, where there are no other people on that river. Curiously enough, it's just pretty much just me. And maybe 1 or 2 other, really serious kayakers. And there are a few kayak clubs. I found one in Yokohama, for example, and they like to go out where the big ships are in the harbor. It's exciting. And they're starting to play around with going multi-season, because when it snows, it's just that much more colorful. When it rains, it's just that much more interesting. The danger element will elevate a little bit, but big waves of consequence. It's not my first time surfing here. And that's a different kind of camping. It's a different kind of field craft. How you dress, how you eat, what you your plan as far as going out and stopping and returning all becomes different when it's snowing. It's not the same as something like in the Amazon where we've been, or New Guinea, for example. It's a whole different set of gear and a different way of even paddling the boat. They're just starting to do that now. It's still very unusual to them, even the idea of doing something like that. But it's like paddling through a movie set. It's post-apocalyptic, and you see the giant, super modern, futuristic highways, but you're right in the middle of feudal-era Japan. Those bricks and the way the stones and the way the entire canal and everything is set up. The only thing that's modern in the middle of that is your boat. And, our bodies are warmed by Thinsulate, protected by Gore-Tex, of course. I like to listen to, classical Japanese music, the flute, and the kabuki music with the drums, and just adds a little something. Put it on the Beats headset. The better way, though, is not to use headsets. The better way is to take a little beatbox, something with a speaker, wrap it in a garbage bag, and bungee cord it to the front of the combing where you sit, like this. Try to go with a 2-person boat. You dig? I'm a great DJ. I'm a great aqua DJ, baby, and play music like this as you're heading down the middle of 1602 in the middle of Japan. Turn right. Hot tub. Now, I'm not an athlete. I'm a rock star who does athletic stuff. There's a difference, okay? It's like wearing high-top tennis shoes to a business meeting. Lower your expectations. No, I like to do the stuff that I see in the magazines, but I'm not really an athlete. And when we talk about going kayaking, don't get it in your mind that we're talking about being vacuum-packed in Lycra and that we're gunning it, etc. Now, my friend and my mentor in this, my instructor, Eric Stiller, was preparing to circumnavigate, get all the way around Australia in a kayak. His buddy, and he made it about 2/3 of the way. They spent 2 weeks at sea without seeing land once. They saw all the great white sharks and all the whales and everything, and you can live out of these boats for extended periods of time. Once you flip the boat, you can get back in. Think of a bathtub that's 4 to 9 times as long as your normal bathtub, okay? On the inside of the bathtub are inner tubes that are about as big around as little training wheels, as big around as, twice the size of a CD, okay? And those tubes run along the rim. fill them with air. So now that whole bathtub can float in the water. Do you understand? You can fill the bathtub with water and it'll still float. You can turn it upside down. It will still float. And you can fill the nose and you can fill the tail of it with food and water and everything else that you want to do. People fall out of the boats all the time. I've only fallen out of the boat while trying to surf it in Indonesia, but we kind of knew that there was a finite end to that. The beauty of the Klepper kayak, though, to reiterate, think of old wooden airplane models, the way we've seen them made perhaps in television shows or movies, the way old biplanes looked. They were wooden frames that were covered with material. Okay, that's the way a Klepper kayak actually sets itself up. It's a front half of the boat is a wooden frame that looks like a boat. The back half is that way. And then you just pop the sides apart so it tightens up. It slides into a skin. Okay, slides into a skin in the front, slides a skin in the back, and you pop the sides apart and it stays tight that way. The beauty of this is that you can continually ruin the boat and fix it very easily. Now, that's important in your field craft because the old axiom, well, it's not an old axiom, is that if your GPS gets rained on or a gecko shits into the something port, which can happen, okay, then you're no good. My old wet map, I just kind of brushed it off, whatever. So I smashed the nose off the front of my boat trying to bring it in on a surfing wave in Bali in Indonesia. I went immediately to the infirmary and got my leg splinted. And then we went back and found in the garbage a couple of wire coat hangers, all right, and some pieces of wood that came from an old umbrella or something, a giant beach umbrella. Started breaking them into pieces and then pulled the nose out of the boat, out of the skin, all right, and duct taped a whole new nose to it. Bent the coat hangers into a U shape, and that's how I made the nose of the boat. And then using the wood with a bunch of duct tape, just kind of rebuilt it and splinted it, slid it back in, and, like my nose, it was bent off to the right, but... good to go. And ultimately, at the end of a good trip like that, there's going to be 9 different fix-it spots on your boat where you crashed it, or where it fell into the rocks, or your pack strap broke and it smashed this apart. But because it's a frame of pieces of wood, all of which can be kind of jimmy cracked, handy. Wait a minute, if I turn this one upside down, we can tape it into place on the left and it'll be lumpy, but so am I. Really. And the rudder just disappeared somewhere, and I'm not going into that water because we all know what's about 8 inches down, and it's hungry too. So you know what? Why don't we use this piece of wood that I just found floating over there? We can nail the coat hangers to it, and you can jimmy it together, all right? You can Dennis the Menace it together. That's the beauty of the Klepper kayak. And I've used these around the world, all right? Not just in tropical environments. For example, in Schweinfurt, Germany, we set up our kayaks at night, hiding from the authorities. It's all innocent horseshit, but hiding from the authorities. We lowered the boats down to the water level where they had the submarines for the German Nazis in Schweinfurt, the submarine berths in the harbor there, and went kayaking at night during the full moon on that black water where all the giant berths for the submarines were. And they had the giant rings where they would throw those big fat ropes and tie off those ships, those boats. And the rings are made of foundried steel, and they're the size of think of the biggest tractor tire that you've ever seen. One of those big giant steel rings must weigh tons, and they hang from the walls. They'll be there 1,000 years still. And you see all the hardware, where they used to anchor them and tie them and so forth. And it's like going through a movie set late at night, inky black, dirty water, It's still industrial and so forth. And the whole time you're hiding from the authority. I did 55 miles around an island in Tahiti with a stripper from Dallas. It was great. Stacy was the greatest. She was built tough. Not everybody is built for a trip like that, okay? Because you're literally living out of the boat. And it's a small 2-person boat. And then we even switched from the kayak to an outrigger. I have a friend who lived over in Tahiti. I'm sure he's still there. I haven't seen him in years, Johnny, who is a full-blooded national Tahitian. His father showed him how to build the house out of whatever, palm fronds without using nails kind of a thing. And he hand-hewn an outrigger canoe out of one tree. And, you know, in the ancient tradition, so I borrowed that. So it was even more difficult than just living out of a kayak that's super modern. Then we even, well, to me it was an upgrade. We moved to the ancient tradition of outrigger and made it all the way around the island, stopping at night. We would see little beaches, etc., and we would pull the boat over. And it's a matriarchal society there. The dames run the show, you know. And Stace would go up and talk to the lady of the hut and describe that we were traveling. You know, the amount of planning that we actually did, I called it Keep Tahiti on the Left. There was no actual GPS programming. There was no map, no compass, just a lot of music, you know, and, a tape deck inside of a garbage bag. And as long as the island was on its left, which is more difficult than it sounds, okay, currents notwithstanding. And she would go up and talk to the lady of the hut, who was always just some gal, you know, literally in a thatched roof, palapa kind of a setup, you know, and say, yeah, I'm here with a guy, and would you mind if we sleep on your beach, you know, and we'll clean up after ourselves, etc. And, oh, no problem, and everything. There's a very different reaction when I went and knocked on the door. So I would start, and we would dig a hole, and we would eat whatever we fished up, etc. And when you travel in Tahiti, I described it earlier, but so much more so is that you have coral beds that are 100 yards, that's the length of a football field, off of shore. And you'll see coral beds that are 6 inches below your boat. And it's only 6 inches. You can literally reach down and touch the floor, so to speak. You'll think, oh my God, we're going to scrape the bottom, and sometimes you do. And you continue going, and all of a sudden, nothing, 1,000-foot drop. 1,000 feet is as high as the Empire State Building, and the water is unbelievably clear. And when the sunlight is aimed in the right direction, you can see so far that it takes your breath away, and you feel like you're flying. So I would play music like this as we would go. And once we made it around the island, one time Johnny lent me his treehouse. That's a whole nother story. David Lee Roth, Big Wave Dave, talking about kayaking here. Have you ever been kayaking? You've done canoeing and so forth. We did that too. We got an engine. This is some rock star shit. I had a canoe, that standard camp ways, whatever. But you can get a little engine that sits, it doesn't sit right in the back. It sits on the side in the back. The guy in the back has an engine on the side. And I had the engine tweaked out a little bit so it would push the boat a little faster than normal, whatever. And what you would see, if you couldn't see the little engine, is you would see a canoe going by with two guys barely paddling with the nose up out of the water, zooming by. Kind of defeats the whole purpose as far as physical fitness, but we looked good. Yeah. And then, I started buying different size kayaks and so forth. One of the best trips that we ever did going out of New York City is the Midnight Full Moon Run. You leave from the South Street Seaport, which is where you can see the Statue of Liberty. This is where all the boats are. This is on the ass end of Wall Street, okay? It's south of Wall Street. And you put the boats in the water, build the boats, okay? And you would get in the water right around midnight. And that's when it gets quietest, okay? Particularly in the wintertime. Things seem to settle and the water starts to radiate. Sometimes you get the plankton and everything is radiant and it looks like you're floating over stars. It looks like you're floating through the stratosphere or some such, and it's inky and it's black and you got a Stevie Wonder your way. A lot of it. You just got to kind of feel where you are because you can't visually orient. Everything's changing. You see the glint, you see the glimmer, you see reflection, but you're not really sure where the water level is. You're not really sure where the horizon is. You see the moon, and the city is completely lit up. It's Blade Runner, all right? And we would make our way in the snowstorms. We would go across from the South Street Seaport underneath the Verrazano Bridge down towards Coney Island. And at this point in time, this was not a legal pursuit. It was, it's harmless, whatever. But nobody was kayaking those days. This is early 90s, all right? Today, again, there are midnight cruises to Brooklyn, overnight cruises, disadvantaged kid cruises, gay cruises. There's everything you follow. But then, no. Because people were getting run over by the ferry boats and stuff who couldn't see you if you weren't lit up. And even if you were, how fast can you move a ferry boat around? Not fast is the answer. So we had to sneak, and the Coast Guard would be patrolling or the police boats would be around, and you would have to very quietly, with no lights, go under the Verrazano Bridge. It's like a wartime movie. It was like something, from World War II. And in the snow, we would go underneath the Verrazano Bridge. That's the bridge that they talk about in Saturday Night Fever when he looks at the bridge. Coney Island is off to the left. And we had a buddy who worked for a plumbing company, so he got a hold of a plumbing truck when we did these trips. And he would park over by the Ferris wheel near Stillwell Avenue. And as we got off beam to him, a beam, it's called, to where he's really off of our shoulder, he would blink his headlights a couple of times. And we would flash our flashlight a couple of times and orient ourselves so we would have a straight line when we turned left to rush in, get out of the boat. You couldn't surf the boat in. The boats are too long, okay? They'll purl over, it's called, where they'll go end over end. So wearing wetsuits, we would have to get out of the boats into black water in the snow and hang on to the back of the boat and surf it in the dark, okay? Bring the boats in, pull them out of the water, take them apart halfway, throw them into the plumbing truck, and get out of there as fast as you could. Because otherwise, like a $300 trespassing fine or whatever, endangering yourself publicly or whatever the case was. I'm not sure if the actual trip or the ins and the secret agentism of it was some of the best part, And I remember floating off of there sometimes for an hour, waiting because, of course, Ricky's always late. Detained at a roadblock, probably. Bullshit. He's having drinks with his buddies over at the shop, and he forgot he had to come pick us up. So we're bobbing around there. It's 8 o'clock. It's 10 after 8. It's a quarter to 9. Finally, we would see the blinks. You follow? And then you kind of aim the boat and blink back and then go, here we come. Boom. And you get out of that boat and try and surf that thing in there. Different kinds of trips when you're kayaking. When you get into a boat, you become part of the boat. We use what's called spray skirts. And the combing, the hole that you sit in, you put on what looks like a ballet tutu. It fits you skin tight on top with a zipper. It's rubber. And you sit down into the hole and then it stretches over the hole. It's got like a bungee cord in the end of it. Think of it like a skirt that hangs off of your shoulders. It's skin tight and waterproof. And the bottom of it is wide and it fits around the hole so that you can completely submerge the boat and you're part of it. The boat will not admit water. It's always going to drip a little, but this is how kayakers can roll the boat, and this is how you can puncture waves, okay? What we would do on some nights is we would wait for when the speedboats would come around, like on 4th of July or Labor Day weekend or whatever, and they're going to put off huge wakes. When you're in a kayak, you're actually part of the wave. Half of you is underwater. So you're sitting literally at water level. And when a speedboat goes by, it'll put off a wake that looks as high as a basketball hoop to you. Whether it is or not, it's entirely beside the point. It's awe-inspiring. And if you have your spray skirt on nice and tight and you know what you're doing in the boat, instead of trying to take it on the side and roll up and over, you aim the nose of the boat directly into the wake and submerge completely. Start screaming while you're under the water, and as the nose bursts out the other side, voila, that's how you're going to spend your day, all right? And this is how you can, when you use a spray skirt, then the inside of that boat stays nice and dry. Routinely, we flip the boats and we got to go help each other roll back up. If you have a little spit boat, they're called, a little shorty, then you can Eskimo roll and you can get yourself flipped back up. The bigger boats, if you have 2 people in the boat and you turn upside down, the best you can do is kind of float sideways with your, your flotation on, your life preserver, and the other 2 boats will raft up next to you and say, "What the fuck are you doing?" They'll yell that in several languages. And then, you try and winch each other back up. Or you crawl out of the boat and then cowboy up the ass end of it. Okay, crawl out of the boat, get it upright. Now, start to crawl on your belly up the back of the boat. Now the hole is underneath your belly. Pull your legs up, squeeze back in. You got the picture, okay? Or you get your other 2 friends, 1 boat on either side. They throw their oars across. They go, "Get in here, it's lunchtime." And you have now 3 boats rafted together. Use your bungee cords or your arms to hold it steady. Get on your belly, pull your fat ass straight up the back of the boat till the hole is under your belly. Pull your legs up, get into the hole. Who brought the bagels? No, this is how you roll. And I started to illuminate that it's not all about adventure travel and whatever. Rafting is probably right on the top of the list there. That's when you take 2 or more boats and you put the oars across sideways, and now your boat is 2 boats wide. I've been in rafters that's, maybe 8 boats wide, okay? And you get sideways into the current with no intention of getting anywhere, as slow as you can possibly go. We're going nowhere, and we're going as slow as we can go. I've spent entire weeks doing that in the kayaks, okay? Get 8 different boats, okay, kayaks, canoes, whatever. Everybody's got extra oars. Throw them across the tops, lace them, tie them down. So now you're effectively in a raft 8 boats wide, okay? It's not going anywhere fast, especially if you turn it sideways against the current. You take forever to get nowhere. And now is when you decide, okay, what are we having for lunch? And who's in charge of the music? And who brought the suntan shit? Et cetera, et cetera. You can literally lay across the boats in suntan, okay, and use it as a swimming platform. I've used those as scuba platforms. All of it at the same time platforms, because it's as wide as this room. And you can literally walk across depending upon how much out you've had to drink and how encouraging the amen corner and the rest of the boats are. Anybody who tries to dance across the boats, historically will be encouraged, because we all know how it's going to end up. And that's when we cut to who brought the first aid kit, and that's usually me. But when you're rafting, it's a nice, slow, easy go. There's races, where the last place wins the biggest trophy. So, and an athletic way to work on your suntan. And the Kleppers, when you're done, you can take them apart wherever you are. You don't have to do designer outings where you don't have to remember which way you went. Same way we do on the bicycles when we're on tour. I pay no attention to where we are. I get lost intentionally, and we'll call the hotel later and say, I'm on the corner of Walk and Don't Walk. I'm having barbecue. Send the van. A lot of times when we go kayaking and I'm talking about how the draft underneath the boat is very close by, that's visually wonderful, but if you fall out of the boat, you're going to hit your head, so you got to wear a helmet. We use bicycle helmets usually, okay? Sometimes guys use snowboard helmets or something like that, lightweight stuff. And a little trick that you do is on the top of your baseball hat, when you need to have a sun visor underneath your helmet, there's that little rivet that sits on the top, and whenever you pump on the top of your helmet, it hits that rivet and it hurts like hell. Most people don't know it, but if you pry slowly with your thumbnail, you can pry that rivet out of the top of your baseball hat. Your baseball hat will not fall apart, and when you put the helmet on, then somebody can tap it real hard on the top, or you can fall out of your boat and hit the bottom, and it's not going to leave a hole the size of a number 2 Eberhard pencil in the top of your skull there. You'll see that the rivet is missing right here on the top. So when you put your bicycle helmet on, you do this on the bicycle as well. Because if you ever fall on top of that little rivet, man, woo, that's the first thing that's going to show up on the x-ray there or whatever. I knew that when we were kayaking, for example, in Japan, we had a person or two who was brand new to the boat, and they were brand new to that kind of weather because it was winter and it was snowing. And it was one of the hardest winter, I think it was a 100-year storm. And the entire winter is picturesque, to say the least. So I knew that if we go anywhere, irregardless of if you can still see the sides of the canal, you go into cold water like that, then everything shuts down. You follow? Somebody is particularly a novice or a newbie, somebody who's not familiar with that kind of cold, who's not used to the boat. You'll forget everything because you haven't put in enough hours of just learning like anything else. And I knew that it was going to be up to me to be, to kind of call the shots. Nobody's dying. Nobody's frying. Nobody's, flying off to be rescued or whatever. But it can be a traumatic experience. So to get ready for that, I started taking colder and colder showers. And over a period of about a month, in the middle of the winter, it got to where I didn't even turn the hot water on. And I could go directly into that freezing ass water, do everything I had to do without hurrying up, without yelling. I would sing along with the song very loudly. I would pick certain music and I would sing throughout, you follow. Because one of my recommendations, and I learned this as well, is when you go into the drink, start yelling. It'll get your blood rate moving. It'll get your heart pounding. You follow. Keeps everybody alert around you. Alerts all of us to where you are. And as soon as I don't hear yelling, we now move to triple tempo. Yeah, okay. So, I would sing along, but I would get through a normal 10-minute shower without any hot water at on in the middle of the Japanese winter there or whatever. Luckily, I didn't have to actually use that capacity. But in terms of just getting ready for it, you follow. One of the ways that we get ready is swimming in the cold water. When you have a dock that is familiar, when you have people who are coming routinely, you learn how much you can actually take. And that you can see it as a challenge, that it becomes fun. It's not so much a life-threatening terror event as I can swear and yell and thrash around. Oh, yes, come on, start swearing, yell. Okay, now you feel your heat coming up. You feel more in control of the situation and whatnot. I'm obsessive. Have you noticed? when we get ready for the camping trips and whatnot, my mind goes back to when my father told me, Jesus, I think it was in 7th grade. I was about 13 years old. He said, you know, one of the greatest sportsmen of all time, Jim Thorpe, the Indian, he used to sleep on the floor, you know, at the Carlisle Indian Institute because it reminded him of his tough times and everything. He said, you want to be tough? You sleep on the floor one night a week without it. Don't sleep in a bed. A couple weeks later, I came back. I said, I just slept an entire week on the floor. My pop looked over and said, "Did you use a pillow?" Getting ready for these trips, I go right back to that stuff. If we're going camping anywhere, I start sleeping on the floor 4 weeks in advance. I turn off the hot water. I throw away the car keys. We start walking everywhere, etc. The getting ready is as much fun and as much of a challenge. And no, I don't use a pillow.
Play action.
We appreciate the opportunity that you've given us to come into your homes today.
For you.
She'll read you like a book.